Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. As we welcome in Eddie Chazan, Mel Zachter, Shimon Klein, Stephen Holtzman, Saba, Nachman Chapler, Mark Frankel, Berish Gessman, Aaron Swade, Moshe Lehman, Ruvain Pollack, Avi Ament, Michal, Irving Fishbaum, Dr. Guy, Rabbi Kranz, A.B. Spry, Philippe Black, Elia Schuttman, Shelley Zeitlin, Yitzi Muller. Here in the shul we have Gedalia Engel, Rich Lenner, Reb Kramer, David Helfkat, and Kol Lashin, responsibly Nishma, Esther Basyoni, Yaakov Chaim Ben Abba, Abraham, and Shmuel HaKohen, the Refuah Shlema for Baruch Shlomo Ben Lina, by Aaron Swade, the Refuah Ili Nishma, Chana Bas Shmuel, and Freda Bas Shol, by Mark Frank, the Refuah Shlema for Miriam Sarah Bas Zipporah, and Chana Bas Gittel Esther for Berich Goldwasser, with appreciation for what Hashem did for their family and for all the Chayla Yisrael. We also learned the Refuah Shlema for my Shver Vigdaya ben Rivka, for Meir ben Chayasara, Hayeled ben Chava, and Yehuda Cyril Bas Miriam. We are holding now, as we welcome in Yitzi Padower for our 24th Zoomer of the evening, we are holding now 3 lines from the bottom of Daf Ayin Beis and Beis, 3 lines from the bottom of Ayin Beis and Beis as we welcome in. Also, I believe Avram Shenkman is here, correct? Avram Shenkman is here, and I'm getting some water, which is very good. Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'akol niyeh b'dvaro.
Double portion for double share.
Thank you. So now the Gemara tells us, if you remember, we have a machlokes whether a ger is allowed to marry a mamzer, and the root of the machlokes is whether we consider kahal gerim ikri kol. The Torah says lo yavai mamzer b'kahal Hashem. A mamzer shouldn't come into the broad congregation of Hashem. So if you hold that a ger could marry a mamzer, that means that the ger is not considered part of the kol. Of course, the ger is a Jew, but he's not considered. If you hold he can't, then he is considered part of the kol. So let's see the Gemara inside. Tana Rabbanan ger noisei mamzeres. A ger is a convert is allowed to marry a mamzeres, which gives a lot more people for the mamzer to marry. Divrei Rabbi Yaisi, Rabbi Yehuda ger lo yisa mamzeres. A ger is not allowed to marry a mamzeres. Echad ger. Now here we have an interesting rule. The rule is that lo yhuzaru. We'll talk about that. Echad ger, echad eved meshuchrer, a convert, an emancipated slave, and a chalal. That's the product of a almana l'kain gadol or a grushel of a chalutza l'kain hedyet. Mutarim b'kohenes are allowed to marry a kohenes. You know, the laws of kohen and kohenes are not always the same. For example, a kohen can't become tameh. That's why you see kohanim standing outside of the, funeral home. But a kohenes can go inside the funeral home. A kohenes can become tameh. So the same thing is true. While a kohen is not allowed to marry a halala, but a kohenes is allowed to marry a chalal. A kohenes is allowed to marry a ger. A kohenes is allowed to marry a emancipated slave. And that's what the Gemara says. Let's see it inside. Echad ger, echad eved meshuchrer v'chalal, a convert, a emancipated slave, or a chalal mutarim b'kohenes. Now, we'll talk about that shortly. We're going to get back to the machlokes now about whether a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres. So my time with Rabbi Yaisi, why does Rabbi Yaisi say that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres? So the Gemara says because chamisha kahale ksive. It says kahal in the Torah 5 times in regard to marriage. Right? They are, Rashi says, lo yavai mamzer b'kal Hashem, lo yavai loi b'kal, he's not allowed to come into the kol, lo yavai amoini u'mo'avi b'kal, lo yavai lehem b'kal, and it also says by the Egyptian, Dor Shlishi Yava Lehem B'Kol. So it says Kol 5 times. Chad l'kahanim, one to tell us that a mamzer is not allowed to marry a kohen. V'chad l'Leviim, that a mamzer is not allowed to marry a Levi. V'chad l'Yisraelim, that a mamzer is not allowed to marry Yisrael. V'chad l'mishrei mamzer b'shtuki, that a mamzer is allowed to marry a shtuki. That shtuki, remember, is where we don't know who the father is. So the child is a suffix mamzer, but a mamzer is allowed to marry a shtuki because we darshan b'kahal vadai lo yavai, that the mamzer can't come into a definite call. B'kahal suffix, we don't know what the shtuki is, he's allowed to marry. We've just been joined by a lot of wonderful people as we welcome in Shimon Deer, and Mo Kushner, and Baruch Ian. Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberg is just joining us. Naftali Jablin is just joining us. And Yitzi Padower just came in. And Pesach Siegelman just came in. So we're getting richer by the minute over here. Richer by the minute, as we already have on this early evening 30 Zoomers. 30 Zoomers. Marshall is not even here to gloat yet.
We have one Kohani is coming to include and one's coming to exclude.
You don't mean the chad and one lemishrei shtuki bi Yisrael. One is to permit a shtuki with Yisrael. A shtuki is a person who we're not sure whether he's a mamzer or not. How do we learn that? How do we learn out to permit a shtuki bi Yisrael? Because it says mamzer lo yavai b'kol. Only a mamzer vadai is not allowed to come into the kol. A mamzer suffix is not allowed to come into the kol. That's right. We're darshaning, putting an emphasis on different words and coming out with different results. That is correct. Says the Gemara. The Gemara says, Kal Gerim lo yikrei kol. The Kahal of Gerim is not considered a kol, and therefore a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, I have an extra kahal to exclude Gerim. Why? Because he says, I don't need two kahals for Kohen and Levi. Rabbi Yehuda, Kahanim and Leviim echad kol nafke. Kahanim and Leviim could be learned out from one kol. He has a kol extra to tell me, a yatalei lekal gerim, that gerim are also considered kol, and therefore they cannot marry a mamzeres. Viba Yisema, no. Hani nami trei kolininu. You need a kol for Kohen and you need a kol for Levi. But mamzer b'shtuki, ushtuki b'Yisrael, that a mamzer with a shtuki, which is a suffix, ushtuki b'Yisrael, and a shtuki with a Yisrael, which is a suffix, mechad kol nafka. We learn them both out from the same kol, that the Torah only asks a situation of a vadai, it doesn't answer a situation of a suffix. And as the Gemara explains, so Yavai mamzer b'kal Hashem, a mamzer is not allowed to come into Kal Hashem. That's a mamzer vadayu d'lo yavai. Where we know for sure he's a mamzer, but if he's a shtuki, so we don't know for sure he's a mamzer. A mamzer suffix yavai, and then it says b'kal vadayu d'lo yavai, that a mamzer can't marry into a definite kol. Ha b'kal suffix, if he's a shtuki, so we don't know if he's part of the kol yavai. So therefore, since he only needs one for both sides of the shtuki, then he has an extra one to tell me that kahal gerim ikrei kol, and therefore a mamzer, a ger is not allowed to marry a mamzeres. V'ibo yisema, a third shot, hani nami trei kol einin. We need two psukim for the mamzer marrying the shtuki and the shtuki marrying a Yisrael. But the time made Rabbi Yehuda mehacha. The reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that a ger can't marry a mamzeres is from the following pasuk. The pasuk says, "Hakol chuka achas lochem v'lager hagar." The kol is one statute for them, for you and for the ger. So we see that both that a ger is also called kohol, because the pasuk in one breath says hakol and it says v'lager hagar. So you see that ger is considered kol. Now, how does Rabbi Yossi counter? Rabbi Yossi says that a ger is not considered kol. How does Rabbi Yossi counter this proof? Well, Rabbi Yossi chuka achas hifzika inyan. It doesn't say ger right next to kol because the chuka achas, the one law, interrupts between the kol and the mention of ger. Now, we learned another halacha, and that is that a kohenes, although a kohen can't marry a giyaris, a kohen can't marry a shifra meshachreres, a kohen can't marry a halala, but it doesn't go both ways. As we have now hit 31 Zoomers, as we welcome in Dr. Block for our 31st Zoomer of the evening. Where is Marshall? He could have enjoyed all of this. Anyway, says the Gemara, Echad ger ve'echad eved mishuchra v'chalal, a convert, a emancipated slave, or a chalal, which is a product of a grusha to a kohen or an almana to a kohen gadol, mutarim b'kohenes, is mutter to a kohenes. And this is the rule of Rav, Messiah Rav. This is a proof to the rule of Rav. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav lo yuhuzaru kisheira yislinasei l'psulim. Just like we said that there's a difference between a kohen and a kohenes vis-a-vis tuma. A kohen can't become tuma l'meis, a kohenes can. So also a kohenes is allowed to marry psulim. She's allowed to marry a chalal. She's allowed to marry a ger. She's allowed to marry an eved mishuchra. Dorish Rav Zeira b'Mechuzah. Now Mechuzah, which was Rava's city. Rava was not only a great Talmudist, but he was the Rav of Mechuzah. Mechuzah has a lot of characteristics that we learned throughout Shas. One of the things about Mechuzah is it was a wealthy town. It was a wealthy town. It was a port city. The Gemara says in Masechtas Gittin Shani b'nei Mechuzah denaydei. They're always on the move. It was a port city, and as it is, port cities in those days, like the famous port city of Caesarea, they were very wealthy because of import and export. Another thing about Mechuzah is it was a city of Gerim. You know, lately in the last, I would say, about 15 years, Scranton has become very populated by Gerim. Mechuzah was very populated by Gerim. So now listen to how this, even in Psak, you have to know how to be diplomatic. As the Gemara is going to show us now, a very interesting thing. Okay, we got a 30-second zoomer over here. Very good. Who is that? Who is that? Oh, that's Yisrael Fisher in the car. Yeah, he's coming to Lakewood. Now, we got a seat here for you, Rabbi Yisrael. Okay, 32 Zoomers, not bad. So the Gemara now tells us, Dorish Rav Zeira b'Mechuzah, Rav Zeira expounded in Mechuzah, Ger mutter b'mamzeres. A ger is permitted to marry a mamzeres. Now that's not very popular in the city of Gerim. They don't like to hear that they're not considered a call. That's, Rigamua kule alma be'esragaya. They pelted him with an esrogim. Amar Rava, so Rava says, that's not the way to talk to Gerim. Amar Rava, mi ikid the dorish milsa ki agavna beduchta d'shchiche giyayre. Now, Rava is not saying that you bend the truth. Of course, chas v'shalom. Rava is the great Talmudist. The halach is always like Rava because he's a Basra. But he says you have to know how to break the news gently. And Rava showed him how. Dorish Rava b'Mechuzah, Rava darshan in Mechuzah, ger mutter b'kehenes. A ger is allowed to marry a kehenes because that's consistent with Rav's rule that lo yehuzuru ksheris milas minasei l'psulim. So ger is allowed to marry kohenes. Oh, that stoked their egos very well. Tanu b'shirai. So they loaded him with silks. Hadar Darish Lo, then he gave them the bad news. He said first the good news, then he gave them the bad news. Ger mutar b'mamzeres. So they said to him, Amrulei afsidita l'kamaisa. You ruined your first teaching. In other words, you started off well, but that's not a happy situation. Amar lahu, so he said to them, what are you talking about? I gave you the best of both worlds. The tavaluchu avdeluchu. I gave you the best of both worlds. If you want, you can marry a kahanis, but if you want, if you want, you can marry a mamzeris. The whole pool is open to you. You know, you got a wide range, and that's the halacha. The hilchas are ger mutar b'kahanis and mutar b'mamzeris. A ger is permitted to marry a kahanis and mutar to marry a mamzeris. Mutar b'kahanis is allowed to marry a kahanis because of the Rav, that the Kohanis is not warned off from marrying a Chalal, a Ger, or a Eved Meshucher, or Mutar Mamzeres, and he's permitted to marry Mamzeres, Rabbi Yosi, like Rabbi Yosi holds, that Kal Gerim Lo Yikrei Kal. Okay, just getting underway on a beautiful Wednesday evening with a great Chumash here on tap. So wait for that, and we have a special sponsor tonight. Our very own Dr. Block is sponsoring. As a matter of fact, what happened is I didn't have a sponsor, so the last minute, Dr. Block came to the rescue. There wasn't even one sponsor this week. Elu hein shtuki. What is a shtuki? Kol shemakir is imay, where we know the mother, but we don't know the father, right? And if he says dad, mishaskenosai. I'm a Rava. So Rava says, now, if you remember all the way back to the start of this fascinating perek, when we learned about who's allowed to marry who, so in the beginning of the perek, it says in the Mishnah, that Geirei v'charurei mamzerei u'nesinei shtuki v'asufei kulam mitar love zeh. That means that the shtuki is not allowed to marry Yisrael. His allowance starts only from the Geirei and the charurei, but the shtuki is not allowed to marry a kahani levi Yisrael because he's a suffix mamzer, since we don't know who he is. Says the Gemara, in reality, V'amarava. We'll just get the place. Amarava Dvar Torah, by biblical law, shtuki kosher. A shtuki who we don't know who the father is really allowed to marry a Yisrael. You know why? My timer, what's the reason? Here you have a woman, Rav Ksherim Etzla. You understand that we're assuming this woman is not married. Because if this woman is married, what does she have to lose? She should say it's her son. So obviously she's not married. So we don't know who the father is. So Rav Ksherim Etzla. Most people are kosher to her. Most people in the world are kosher to her. Or only a miyat psulun etzla. Maybe it's a mamzer, maybe it's a nasan, maybe it's her brother, but Rav are kosher. Therefore, v'i ozli inhu legaba. If the man came to her and slept with her, then we have a rule called the parish meruva parish. Everybody that separates from the Rav. And therefore we assume that the husband is kosher. What are you going to say? My Amra Dilma Ozla Ihi Legabayu. She went to them. And if she went to them, the din is, if the suffix is kavua, is in a fixed place, we say kol kavua kemechzel mechzedami. Havale kavua, the man who we don't know is stationary. V'kol kavua kemechzel mechzedami. And if it's a 50-50 suffix, we said Vatara Amr, the Torah says lo yavai mamzer vadayu de lo yavai. Only if he's a definite mamzer. Ha mamzer suffix, if it's 50-50 yavai. So really, a shtuki should be able to marry a Yisrael. B'kal vadayu d'lo yavai. He's just not allowed to marry into a kal vadai. B'kal safek yavai. But a kal safek you could marry into. The bottom line is, so then matam omru shtuki pasul. Why do we say that a shtuki is not allowed to marry a Yisrael? Because since we know since let's say this shtuki is a boy, since we don't know who the father is, we're afraid that he might marry his sister. Since we don't know who the father is, he might marry his sister. Says the Gemara, well, elamiyata shtukis lo yisa. We said that a shtuki is allowed to marry another suffix. But why? Maybe the boy will end up marrying his sister. Shema yisa achoisai me'aviv. So the Gemara says, well, it's not likely that this man slept around with so many people. Kol kihani mizanav yazli. Is it likely that this man had so many promiscuous acts? Says the Gemara, but bas shtukis lo yisa. Shouldn't be able to marry the daughter of a shtuki. Because since we don't know, Shema Yisa Achoisei Me'aviv, since we don't know who the father is, maybe he's going to end up marrying his sister from the same father. Ella says the Gemara lo shchicha. We're not worried about that because that's far-fetched. It's far-fetched. Just the woman, the wide blue yonder is it's not his sister. We're not worried about that. Hachanami lo shchicha. Here also we shouldn't be worried. So why is it the halacha that a shtuki is not allowed to marry Yisrael? Says Gemara, it's taka chumra. Elamaylo asu b'yuchsin. They made a higher level in yichus in order to protect the genealogy, the pedigree of Klal Yisrael, and they said if you don't know who the father is, a Yisrael shouldn't marry the person. Even though me'ikar adin, we would go bas a raiv, or at least a suffix, and it should be allowed. And the Gemara says the same thing is true of Amar Rava. The same thing is true of foundling in the street, should also be permitted. Dvar Torah asufi kasha. If you find a foundling in the street, so really an asufi should be able to marry Yisrael. Why? My timer. Eishes ish, if she was a married woman, she wouldn't put the child in the street. She would just say it's her husband's. The Bala Torah. So obviously it's not the child of a married woman. We don't have to worry that she committed adultery and that's why she put the child out on the street. Because she could just pass it off as her own child. Nobody will know it's not her husband's child. My Ika, Miyad Arusis, if she was engaged. So she was engaged, she doesn't want to admit that she had the child because everybody will know it's not the husband because they were only engaged. And then that would be a child of adultery. Or Miyad Shalach Baleim Limnir Siyam, or the husband was overseas, so she couldn't say it's from her husband, so that's why she put it out. So in those two cases, the child would taka be a mamzer. But Kevanika Pnuya, there are a lot of cases where she had a one-night stand, and the guy ran away, and that's why she put it out in the street, and that, of course, would not be forbidden, because it's only from a panuya bal, a pnuya. The ikanami de machmas raven, and sometimes they put out a child because they can't feed the child. They don't have the money. So they put it out for somebody to take care of it. So have a palga. So then it's an equal suffix, and an equal suffix we said should be permitted. Only if it's a definite mamza, mamza suffix yavai. B'kal vadayu only should, it just says the whole memra. You just can't come into the definite kal, b'kal suffix yavai, but into an uncertain, you're allowed to marry. So really it should be permitted because it's an equal suffix. Umatam amru asufi pasul. Again, so the Gemara wants to try to say, because since we don't know who the parents are, Shema Yisa Achoisei, this boy might end up marrying his sister. So the Gemara says, Al miyata asufi sol Yisa Shema Yisa Achoisei Bein Me'avid Bein Me'imai. You shouldn't marry because you might end up marrying his sister, might be a sister from the mother, might be a sister from the father, since we don't know both these people's parents. So the Gemara says, Kol Hani Shadi V'Azlei. Are we going to say that the same parents keep on putting their children on the street and keep on having children out of wedlock? So the Gemara says, but Basa Sufi lo Yisa, the daughter of Asufi shouldn't marry, Shema Yisa Achaisei, since we don't know who the parents are. Ela lo Shchiach. We're not worried about it because it's not likely. So Achanami lo Shchiach. It's not likely that you'll end up with your sister. Ela again, Maila Asu B'Yuchsin. They only made a higher standard by Yuchsin.
Are we afraid that this person's maybe a guy?
What? No. We're talking about in a place where Rav people are Yidden. Now, the Gemara now tells us that the only time we think that the child is of a forbidden nature is if we see that the child was abandoned without concern. But if the child was taken care of, then we feel that the child was abandoned not because of that they were throwing it away, but rather because they couldn't take care of it. They couldn't feed it. And therefore, Amar Rava bar Avuna, Motzim Mohol, if you found the child circumcised, then Ein By Mishum Asufi. Why? Because if the child was a mamzer, they wouldn't bother circumcising it. They're like throwing it away. As Rashi says, look at the top Rashi. Ilav de kosheru lo yavet torcha be mimel be. They wouldn't have trouble to circumcise it. The reason why they did it is because they cared about the child, and they just put it on the doorstep because they couldn't take care of the child. They didn't have the money. Similarly, mishalte hadomeha, if they swaddled the child. In olden days, they swaddled the child so that the limbs should be in place. So if they took care of the child and swaddled the child, ein by mishum asufi. Shayif mishcha, if the child was anointed with oil, smeared with baby oil, or malei kuchla, and they put on it, around the eyes some makeup so that the child should look good, ein by mishum asufi. Tala piska, if the child has around it a kameya, an amulet with herbs, or Vitali Kameya, it has an amulet with parchment, with incantations in it, to take care of the child. Again, Ein By Mishum Asufi. Tali B'dikle, if the child was perched, hanging from a palm tree, if it was put in a place where beasts could reach it, then Yesh By Mishum Asufi. They obviously didn't care about the child. Imlav, but if it's in a place where it's out of reach of beasts, Ein By Mishum Asufi. Zardosa. Zardosa was a sorb tree. In Talmudic times, the sorb tree was considered to be haunted with shadim. So Zardosa smicha lamasa, if it's a sorb tree that's near the city limits, yesh by mishum asufi, because a sorb tree near the city limits Gemara says in Psachim, was considered to be surrounded by 60 demons, and it was considered dangerous. The imlav, but if it's not near the city, they don't have demons, then ain't by mishum asufi, if it hung in a place where it was away from beasts. Bei kenishta smichta lamasa, a shul was near the city, ushchicha bei rabim, and has a lot of people frequenting it, then ain't by mishum asufi, because there's no mazik in there. Vim lav, but if it's outside the city, as shuls very often were, and it wasn't populated, so there it's haunted by demons, and therefore yesh by mishum asufi. We see that they didn't care about the child. Amar Ameimer, I pera de sufle. Here they put the child, abandoned the child in a date pit where they used to keep dates. And again, Rashi says this is a place where demons frequented. Then yesh by mishum asufi. Charifta denara. if they put the child by the river current, in a safe place, in like a boat by the river current, where people will find it, and therefore the child won't die of hunger, ein by mishum asufi. Pshare, they put it in the puddle at the edge where nobody is going to see it, so then the child could just die of hunger. Yesh by mishum asufi. Tzidei Rishus Harabim, if the child's put on the side of the Rishus Harabim, where people could spot it, but it's out of danger of being trampled, Ein Boi Mishum HaSufi, Rishus Harabim, but if you left the child in the public domain, where it could be trampled by animals, by people, Yesh Boi Mishum HaSufi. So then we have to be concerned they were throwing away the child as it was an unwanted mamzer. Amar Rava Ubishnei Ravin, but in a time of famine, where people were desperate, then even if the child was put in the Rishus Harabim, ein by mishum asufi. So the Gemara says that's not so simple, because if it's in the Rishus Harabim, what's the difference if it dies of hunger or it's going to get inevitably trampled? Hoda Rava Hai. Rava, when he says if it's a time of famine, it's not an asufi, what's it going on? Ilay ma Rishus Harabim. Well, I need a Shnei Ravin. If it's a time of famine, you're going to put it in the Rishus Harabim where he's going to inevitably get trampled. On the side of the Rishus Harabim. But if it's on the side of Rishus Harabim, even if it's not a time of famine, it shouldn't be a asufi. It was put on the side that somebody should find it. That which he said, providing it's a time of famine, is going on a situation what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Abba, in the name of Rav Yehuda bar Zabdi, in the name of Rav. Kol zman shebeshuk. While the baby is in the street, there's a cry, a baby was found in the street. All the while that the baby is found in the street, the father and the mother are believed to say that's our child. But nesaf min hashuk, once it's gathered in, they're not believed to say it's our child unless they bring proof. My timer. Amar Rava hoyel v'yotza of shem asufi. Once it gets the title of a foundling, then they're not believed to say it's our child unless they bring proof. V'amar Rava b'shnei Ravin, but in a time of famine, where a lot of people abandon their child instead of watching them die, even if it was gathered already in from the street, the father and the mother are believed about him. It's interesting that it said this about this week's Pasha, where Hagar put Yishmael aside and she said, I don't want to see L'maisa Yeled. Very similar to this.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Well, what do we do today about adopted children who we don't know who their parents are?
There are all kinds of complicated halachas with that. There are all kinds of complicated halachas of what kind of child you should adopt because of that. That's why some people want to adopt definite goyim for that reason. Says the Gemara, Amrav Chista, Shloisha Nemonim L'Alter. 3 people, but what I just told you is a very oversimplification of the situation. Your question is very complex. Amrav Chista, Shloisha Nemonim L'Alter. 3 people are only believed if they testify immediately. Eluhein Asufi, foundling, so only if the parents testify before the baby is gathered in from the street are they believed to say it's their child. Chaya, a midwife, to a doula, to say which twin was born first. Upoitris chavruseha, and the case of exempting her colleague, which we'll explain in a minute. Asufi Adaman, Asufi, like we just explained, that the parents are only believed to say that that's our child if they said it before the child is brought in from the street. Chaya. Ditnan Chaya nemenes loimer ze yotze rishon ze yotze sheni. A midwife is believed to say this one was born first and this one was born second. In the case of twins, it makes an afkamina to know which one is the bechor for pidyon haben, which one is the firstborn to inherit a double portion. That's only if she didn't leave the room to go to the bathroom and come back. She was there the whole time. But she wasn't there the whole time, then she's not believed anymore to say which one was which. Ein an emenes. Rebbe Eliezer Eimer, it's not enough that she didn't leave to go to the bathroom. If she was at her post, nemenes. No. What's the difference? The difference is if she turned her head away. The adar appa. One man Yama says as long as she didn't leave the room, she could still say which one was which. Others say if she turned away, then when she turns back, they could have moved around. She's not believed to say anymore which one is which. Poitris chaver se'ah mahi. This is an interesting case. Detnan. Shalosh nasim shoyi yeshenish b'mita achas. There were 3 women sleeping in a bed. The bed had a white sheet. And the women were tossing and turning all over the whole night. And in one spot in the bed, it's not clear from who, v'nimtza dam tachas achas mehem. And there's blood found by one of them. Now, remember, they were all moving around in the middle of the night. So the din is kulan tameis. All the women have to be assumed that they're anida, because we don't know where the blood came from. But ka'achas mehem, but if one of the women checked and found that she was bleeding, the nimtzas tameya, he tameya, we assume that the blood came from her, v'kulan tahirus. However, the Gemara says that's only if she checked immediately. Amarav chista shabatka atzma kashir vest, which Rashi explains it means that she had a b'dika cloth right by the bed and checked herself right away. So then we assume that the blood on the bed is from her and the other 2 women are tar. Now, Tan Rabbana. Nemenes chaya loimer, a midwife is believed to say there are 4 babies in the room. So she's believed to say, Zeh kayin, this one's the kayin, v'zeh levi, zeh nasin, v'zeh mamzer. In other words, there were 4 mothers in the room. One was a Kohenes, one was a Leviah, or one was married to a Kohen, one was married to a Levi, one was a Nasan, and one was a Mamzer. So she could identify this baby is the Kohen, this baby is the Levi, this one's the Nasan, this one's the Mamzer. That's only if there was no protest. Nobody protested her identification. Should the correct pronunciation is shaloi kara aleh shame error. Nobody made a challenge. Nobody contradicted and said that the one that she said is a kayin is a mamzer. Aval kara aleh error, but if there was a challenge, then ain't an emenes. So the question is, what kind of a challenge? What kind of challenge was leveled against her? A challenge from one person. But we said we don't pay attention to the challenge of one person. There's no challenge less than 2. Ella, it must be trey. It must be a challenge from 2 people. Says Gemara another pshat. It was a challenge from one person. Where do we say that we don't pay attention to a challenge from one person where there's a chazaka, where there's a presumptive status? But here there's no chazaka. We don't know which baby is which. It's from the beginning of their birth. So here there's no chazaka. The Chiyam Reb Yochanan Ein Ira Pachas Mishnayim Hanmi Echadis and Chazaka the Kashas, where there was a prior presumptive status of Kashas. Aval Hecha the Leka Chazaka the Kashas. Here there's no presumptive status. We don't know which baby is which. This is the beginning of their life. Chan Nami Mehem, and even the challenge from one person is given legitimacy. Okay, we're going to do now the Chumash share. A very special Chumash share is planned for everybody. Where is my notebook? I didn't bring down my notebook? How is that possible? Whew, wow. Okay, got to get the notebook. Afterwards, we're going to do the Mishnah Yomis, but first we're going to do the Chumash share. What was this, 73?
73. Correct.
Okay, Kidushin Daf 73.